Everyone, well, here it is, a D After X special on PlayStation 5 Pro. It's real, it's official. Mark Cerny has told us all about it in a pretty compact 9-minute presentation. There's a lot to talk about, though. There's been accompanying articles from CNET and a video, which we'll talk about later. There's also been additional detail on the PlayStation blog. Plenty of discussion points to wade through, supporter questions to answer, and basically dealing with a lot of outrage about the price. Joining me on the panel, first of all, Alex Battaglia. Hello.
Oh, yeah. I'm feeling professional this evening. I hope you gents are as well, too.
Absolutely. John Linneman, hi.
Rich, I canceled my order for the Apple Mac wheels so I can afford the PS5 Pro.
Excellent. You should have some money left over. Enough to stand, perhaps, but not the optical drive.
No, not that.
But before we go on, my gambit paid off. I said in D After X Weekly this week that I reckoned it wouldn't ship with a disk drive and there'd be a run on the disk drives as soon as the Pro was announced. I emerged triumphant, as you can see in the background there. Although some might say that Sony is the only real winner there. Let's talk about the first discussion point. Okay, first discussion point. How is Sony going to be marketing the PlayStation 5 Pro? And I actually wrote an article for Eurogamer, which essentially laid out my ideas, which was that, first of all, you start by saying how great the PlayStation 5 is, the base unit. That's your good. And then you start talking about PlayStation 5 Pro, which is the better, good and better. It's kind of like standard consumer electronic stuff, really. And that's exactly what they did. Alex, I think the main point, the main thrust that Mark Cerny was talking about in the presentation there was essentially that, 3/4 of PlayStation 5 players are using the performance modes, and yet the quality modes that are typically pegged to 30 FPS look a lot better. So why not have the best of both worlds? Is that kind of your take on it? And do you think that's a compelling sell for the console?
Oh, wow. I would say that was how it was thrusted forward it was the exact line of reasoning essentially given by Mark Cerny. And I do think the fact that 3/4 of players on PlayStation are using, they didn't mention which titles, but I presume just the Sony titles,
they'd have telemetry of the whole thing. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's awesome. I think it's like halfway there as the way to advertise it towards people, for a variety of reasons, mainly because it does ignore a little bit the I'd say the transformative aspect of things like PSSR, and I think it ignores a little bit the transformative aspects of ray tracing,
right?
Because the PS5 would not necessarily have been utilizing really great ray tracing, for example, even in its quality modes in every game, while maybe the PS5 Pro does allow a game to run with more transformative ray tracing to a certain degree. So I think it's like halfway there. I also think it's only halfway there because it's not necessarily going to be true of all situations, which is something that Mark Cerny talked about at the end of the videos. Like, he said the way this could be used is going to be as varied as all the different engines out there almost. And I think that will bear out when we look at the games. We're going to see probably much like we saw with Xbox One X, for example, or PS4 Pro, a variety of different ways that people will leverage that extra GPU power. And some games won't be able to do we take your fidelity mode and turn it into a performance mode, but they'll maybe do something else, which has other benefits. So I think it's only like halfway there. I would have maybe chosen different examples than were chosen for the video, which we can all talk about. But I think there's the 7 minutes that he had, because there was first setting up that PS5 is great thing. The 7 minutes that he had was so rushed and so like I wanted to know a lot more than what was said actually.
Okay, John, what have you got to add to that?
I mean, I'm continuing right there. I was also left wanting. It did not feel like the traditional Cerny presentation we get.
No, it was very high level. You're right.
And that's a little bit surprising to me because I feel like the people that are going to be spending this amount of money, which we'll get to, are probably very interested in those details, right? This isn't necessarily a mass market product in the same way that no. So I'm a little surprised they went with this format. But one of the things that stuck out from the initial part of the video, though, when talking about quality and performance modes, is how he very specifically called 30 FPS choppy or not smooth. And I thought that was interesting because that's the first time I can recall somebody at that level referring to the frame rate at 30 FPS as not being smooth, which is it's just an interesting thing, an observation, if you will, that was uttered. And I do like this data that it turns out that most players are playing at 60 FPS targets.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. But yeah, like you said, Alex, I feel like some of the examples selected, both through issues with YouTube itself and just the way that they showed the games, like I feel like this almost kind of highlights like, how do you show this to people? Because you're just showing full screen footage running. It's really hard to pinpoint what's even different from a YouTube feed, especially, right? Like you can't really appreciate any of the actual benefits here. And I don't think the video did a good job selling that stuff.
Not at all. I mean, John, do you remember PS4 Pro and the live stream of the PlayStation meeting 2016? And it was talking about 4K resolution and HDR, and the stream just did nothing to actually showcase any of those features.
I think it was 1080p stream, possibly 30. And, I can't remember.
Yeah, and it was a bit of a disaster. And so, I'm looking at I had this PS5 Pro stream running at full screen on my 48-inch OLED, the best quality I could possibly get. And, the stream quality was awful.
Yep.
You could barely tell the difference in any of the comparisons. It was a spectacular own goal and exact rerun of 2016 there. And what can I say? I think, you've got to put your best foot forward in terms of your initial presentation. And I think they could have done a lot better on that regard.
Dare I say they should have been inspired by the work of Digital Foundry? Because people always say, why do you guys pause? Why do you zoom in? Well, part of the reason is that YouTube actually cannot handle this stuff, right? And also people watch on a variety of devices, often not even on 4-screen, right?
50% on mobile phones, which is why we do that.
Exactly. So you cannot see it physically on devices like that. And the YouTube stream makes it worse. This is not how you show these differences to people. And they were not able to do that. And so just to the average person watching, they're going to see nothing, no differences at all. It's just not really feasible to see it here. Yeah. And so I feel like right there, the presentation just didn't work in terms of actually showing what is possible. Because we already kind of know on paper, based on stuff that we already knew, as well as what's talked about here, that things like PSSR, for instance, should actually show a pretty significant difference when used well, right?
Yeah, but we're kind of assuming because we still don't know how good it is based on that presentation.
I mean, Rich, though, if you had to place a wager, would you say it's going to look better than FSR2 on a console?
Well, that goes without question. That's the whole point.
If it didn't, then what are we doing?
So that's what I'm saying. So it's at least going to look better than that.
Yeah, I mean, if they get to XeSS level, that would be great. If they get to DLSS level, then that's
good Lord.
I would say that's a pretty remarkable accomplishment. Actually, I think the marketing message was actually quite sound. It was basically, you love performance modes. Here it is without compromise. So, that was a key part of the marketing message that I think was actually a pretty good way to kick everything off. But let's move on to
real quick, Rich. I want to pop in on that because it actually raises a very interesting point. Because where did performance modes really come from? The PS4 Pro. That's when we started to see them in the console space. And so now we're sort of flipping things around, and the PS5 Pro is seeking to do the opposite, right? That seems to be the goal here, right? Is to sweep them back under the carpet and get rid of that distinction, which is the complete opposite from the PS4 Pro. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting.
Well, let's move on. Second point. Let's talk about, I guess they called them the big three enhancements, the bigger GPU, machine learning,
Oh.
and ray tracing. Sorry, what was that, John?
You're talking about the big three, and I thought you were talking about us, the panel on this podcast. But
The only big three that I'm sort of cognizant is Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop, and Sega Rally.
All right, I'm on board with that.
The big
I
three
agree.
for Sega Rally, for Sega Saturn back in the day.
We can't match up to that.
Yeah,
No.
that was the epoch-making big three. But the big three, the big three for Sony this time is PSSR or PISA, as you like to refer to it.
We're gonna keep that.
Ray tracing and the bigger GPU. Interesting that 60 compute units versus 36, but only 45% of extra GPU power. 67% more compute units for 45% more performance. I guess that kind of makes sense in a world where your memory bandwidth can only go so far and where typically efficiencies sort of drop. It's also interesting that, and this was pointed out to me by Duo on Twitter, I think, where the road to PlayStation 5, Mark Cerny talked about fewer compute units running faster, so kind of narrow but fast. And but this time around, PS5 Pro is essentially wide but the same speed.
Right.
In terms of so it's an interesting sort of distinction as that things have changed clearly because of the opportunities that were actually available to make a Pro console. We are hearing interesting things about a boost mode. Presumably, and you would expect that 45% of extra GPU power goes towards like unenhanced PlayStation 5 games, which should just naturally run faster. Alex, ray tracing, we've got to talk about it. They did emphasize the additional ray tracing power. They did suggest that it's an AMD technology coming from, I guess, RDNA 4. And I think in the CNET article, Mark Cerny was basically saying that Sony were pushing for this. I think we've talked about it in a prior DF Direct Weekly. There have been leaks of what we could expect from RDNA 4 RT, but it's still quite unclear as to how it's going to measure up against, say, NVIDIA solutions, right?
Yeah, it's still just as unclear after this. I think it could have been a bit better communicated what that maybe means with different examples.
Right.
Because we've already seen ray tracing in Gran Turismo 7. It was just limited to photo mode.
Yeah.
Right.
We already saw that. And we also already saw ray tracing. Didn't we already also see ray tracing in Hogwarts? Am I mistaken?
It did have an RT mode, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I feel like they could have shown an example of, based upon a new game, doing something different.
Right.
Maybe they just want to save that up for a different showcase that is coming in the future. But I feel like that would have sold off the RT difference that it could be versus, whatever the standard PlayStation is, or just the standard console experience. So yeah, that. There was the direct reference to can trace rays at 2 to 3 times the speed of PlayStation 5. Well, once again, I'm still wondering exactly what that is referencing, because it's got like just about double the compute units. And
60 versus 72, which would be double. But yeah, I think this is the point. I think I get what you're saying, which is that obviously there's going to be extra RT hardware per compute unit. So it's not
I'm wondering.
It's not all architectural increases. It's also just sheer brute force for more compute, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm like wondering exactly what is it being attributed back to in the hardware, because I think that one leak about the variety of things that are done, spent some more time and talked to someone behind the scenes about it. Like some of them are about like testing triangles better and getting more results, kind of essentially for the same amount of stuff being shot out. And, I think it describes mainly smaller additions to the kind of RDNA and not something so nearly as transformative, actually, as what we saw with Turing or, I guess, Intel back in the day. So I'm still really I really just want to know more. I just don't know nearly enough. And I would have once again chosen different examples. It's really cool to see GT7 with ray tracing and gameplay. I think that's going to be great for people that love that game. But we already saw that on PS5 to a certain degree. So I wanted to see something new. But that was lacking.
I think they just don't have any examples yet because like
Maybe
they were outside of like Hogwarts, they were mostly focused on just first party titles. And I don't think they have anything like unannounced and ready to show where does it even make sense. You know what I mean? Like they're probably just not there yet. I'm actually surprised still they didn't reveal any new games at all, but I guess it's hopefully coming soon.
Well, there are rumors of a state of play, quote unquote,
right.
dropping next week or the week after or whatever.
I will say though that showing GT7 that is a GT7's ray tracing features were pretty high end. Like the reflection quality was way higher than what we typically see in ray traced games on the PS5. It also I hope if it retains the exact same characteristics because it has a very, very, very rough surfaces show reflections in GT7, which is something that usually the roughness cutoff usually gets adjusted for consoles, right? And they allowed extremely rough materials to reflect. And if that's actually in the game, it's pretty cool. But you're right. The other examples, like they showed Hogwarts footage where they were talking about it. It was still running at 30 frames per second, which I thought was interesting given what they were just saying about that earlier.
Yes.
You know?
It's not great, is it?
Yeah, the reflections, I mean, this is an Unreal thing, but the thing is, the reflections were grainy in the Hogwarts footage. And I know Unreal Engine 4's RT reflection support was nascent and it could have been done better. But
extremely heavy.
Yeah, it was also very heavy. But you know, like I could see the grain over the footage at the bad YouTube footage, and I was just wondering, like, is it still like quarter res or something like that? I was, just like wondering all these things, but I can't really know until I have the game in much higher quality in front of me to even say like what this upgrade really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Machine learning based upscaling. What could we say about that? We didn't really have any chance to get a decent look at it, did we?
No.
Potentially transformative. If we're talking about, some sort of XeSS style DLSS. I mean, here's the thing, right? I think it is potentially awesome, right? Because especially when you're using a 4K TV, the amount of actual base resolution you need to get a presentable image on screen is actually surprisingly low. I mean, 1080p works just fine. And, even some of these PlayStation 5 games that go down to like 640p or whatever, put that through a machine learning based upscaler, and even that would look great. So even before you've got the extra GPU horsepower, there's a lot of potential here in terms of actually dramatically increasing the quality, or being able to use the GPU time available, freed up by the machine learning pass, just to do more things, more ray tracing, for example. And I think there was a CNET article there, and that talked about an 8K mode for Gran Turismo, which, let's just say our 8K capture cards are ready and waiting for this.
That's funny though, because that actually does fit in with what Kaz and them love to do with Polyphony, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, they were like one of the first, if not the first, like 1080p thing. They were there with Ridge Racer 7, I guess, but they had the GT. What was it called? It was the GT thing for PS, the Pro, whatever. The one for PS3.
The demo at launch.
Yeah, the demo that was 1080p. Yeah. So they were all, and they had that 1080i mode in GT4 on PS2. So like, it does not surprise me one bit that they would be talking about that, but still 8K. Yeah.
I'm glad that they didn't actually emphasize 8K or even mention 8K at all in the initial presentation.
Agreed.
It was kind of like a bonus, nice to have thing that they included in the CNET presentation. The CNET presentation, utterly bizarre. The video was 1080p 30.
Oh, Rich.
Actually see anything.
How does this stuff happen, right? Like, you give something like that to an outlet and then they don't seem to get even the basics of video encoding and like quality.
I don't even know.
down.
They obviously didn't
It's
record it in
insane to me.
1080/30.
It's
They
insane.
obviously didn't. I mean,
Like, what are they even doing? Why would you upload a 1080p 30 and anymore? The quality is terrible on YouTube, especially for something like this. It doesn't make sense.
Hashtag true facts. Is there anything more we've got to say about the big three before we move on?
About Pisser. I really, for example, they very specifically, other than when highlighting things added to third-party games, so they did highlight Hogwarts, right? And they showed what it is doing differently, but they didn't show a comparison versus what it previously was. And I think they're doing that because they kind of don't want to say like, oh, your multi-platform title doesn't look good enough on PS5, or they just want to leave it to their own library of titles, these examples. So I think like them showing off games that already look kind of okay is good. Yeah, right? Like, I don't think many people were super complaining about the image quality in The Last of Us Part 2's performance mode.
No, Sony's games in general have good image quality.
Yeah, they take care to do that usually. And but if they did, for example, they have Alan Wake 2 as a listed title. Yeah. And if that is using PSSR and is probably now targeting 4K, which I imagine it is,
should be transformative.
If they showed that, just the camera pan with motion blur off in the forest or in the town, or even the character's head or anything like that, versus what presumably is good pisser quality. Well, then you know how this would. If I was doing a video on a PC version of a game and I wanted to show DLSS looking better than FSR2 for something, I would always really show it off. You know, like you can really easily show it off. So I think them being limited to these PS titles as actually, that's not going to be the transformative thing necessarily. I think it could be third-party titles, right? So
that was my big thing, Alex. Is like it felt like what they really needed to show here was some of these Unreal Engine 5 titles. We've been seeing all these UE5 titles coming out with this absurdly low input resolutions, like really like sub 720p in cases, using FSR2, and the result is bad. It's really bad. And this would have been a chance to like really showcase, like, look how much better this looks. But Sony doesn't actually have anything like that in their first party stable.
No.
Unfortunately. I mean, it's good, but also for this case, it's not useful because their image quality is fine. It's the third party stuff that's really, really, really struggling right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to see head-to-heads from Sony because
we'll produce them.
Well, we'll produce them, sure. But the point is that I think they actually sidestepped it quite nicely by saying, yeah, what you're getting at 30 FPS on the base PS5, we can do at 60 on the Pro. That's the kind of like, you know, you can still have that stuff if you want on the base unit, but it's going to be quote unquote choppy. So yeah, but you're quite right. The third party titles, anything that's using FSR2, if it gets a PSSR refit, so to speak, it should be pretty good. Just to sort of go back on some of the details that have come from the developer portal. Previously, gaining new features for old games required updating the SDK, which is quite problematic and actually is very difficult for developers to actually, you know, make their games compatible with new SDKs. PSSR can actually be retrofitted to games running on the older SDK. So potentially, you know, game-changing image quality changes, improvements should be seen there on a range of games. That doesn't require a huge amount of developer input, which is potentially a great thing. One would imagine that the inputs required for PSSR will be the same or very, very similar to FSR2. So it should be, you know, pretty decent and easy to do upgrade for a lot of games. And that's probably going to be quite transformative. And if they're using DRS as well, dynamic resolution scaling, then more GPU power means they're probably going to be reaching upper bounds on that or close to it. So, you know, this is potentially really, really exciting stuff. Is there anything more that we need to talk about before we start talking about the things that are less impressive, like price?
I mean, I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that hits the spot.
It looks promising, but it
Okay.
wasn't necessarily shown off as well as it could have been. Is I kind of think the takeaway here.
Yeah, I think so. I think, we just need to get some good trailers out there that actually show the difference, where somebody's putting in the effort to show the difference. But the question is whether Sony actually wants that from their perspective. It's
Right.
it's kind of weird.
Like, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic, and it's not price. Okay, I really wanted to talk about the reveal at the end. Obviously, we've got the price. Obviously, there's things that are not exactly great about that price. But I think compounding the issue, and I want to talk about this first of all, is the lack of an optical drive. John, you've talked about that in a prior direct. We've got issues with this. Let's talk about, first of all, just the concepts that you've got a pro-level machine that is lacking features that the standard model that's $200 cheaper has, I think is a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
Why would you be removing features from a Pro model? I guess on the plus side, you are getting a 2 terabyte SSD, which is great. I mean, you would expect to have more storage. But yes, the optical drive situation, this is problematic on a number of levels, because you would expect also the Pro model to be targeting the most dedicated PlayStation gamers, who will almost certainly, surely, have a disk library going back to the PS4 era.
Exactly. And frankly, the price is already so high that, and it's targeting enthusiasts anyway, you may as well do a SKU with the disk drive included out of the box and maybe offer it at a slightly lower price than buying them separately.
I don't think, well, let's make things pretty clear here. It's going to be a niche device, whether it's $600 or $700. So I think there's only really the opportunity to do one SKU.
Fair enough. Then in that case, you're right. I would say
it
should have the gosh darn drive in the box. And I feel like this is not good. It's a very negative thing, both in terms of the added cost and hassle that everyone's going to have to deal with if they want the disk drive, but two, it further sort of starts to spell the end for, is this the last PlayStation that does optical media, disk drives at all? Like, there's a certain point where it's like, if these consoles come out with no disc support, for me, it's like, I don't even see the purpose in owning these things anymore.
Right. We've got this comment here from supporter 10 Bespokes in a trench coat. Hey DF team, ! Concerning the fact that the Pro model does not come with a disk drive and needs the disk drive to connect to their servers before activation, it really concerns me for the future of game preservation. This is the first time, at least in my recent memory, that a flagship model of a console does not include or have a method of physical media playback out of the box. Do you think they are fully preparing for going all digital with a PS6 at this rate? A curmudgeon I may be, but I would still rather own my media in some form. Are my fears misplaced? Hope you had a great week! ! Cheers. I mean, that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, yes.
Wow.
I think his fears are not misplaced.
I mean, the one thing, let's say, actually, no, it's not a good thing. You can actually, it has been confirmed, I think, again in the CNET article, that you can move your optical drive from a PS5 Slim to the Pro. But if you've just bought a PS5 Slim, then, I'd say that you're probably not the target user for the PS5 Pro. You'd have likely have bought the machine at launch. So I guess that's a good thing in one sense, but not great in another. But yes, I mean, the activation thing, which I think we ascertained is some sort of requirement for Blu-ray drives.
Yeah. Due to movie industry, I believe. It
basically means that the machine can't be used with physical media in the far-flung future, when those servers are likely not going to be operating any further.
Better hang on to that original PS5. Mm-hmm. In that case.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, this basically, it was already the case with the Slim, but the Slim and now the Pro are basically like the Xbox Series X, in that they effectively need to be activated to even be used. You can't just pull it out of the box and use it anymore. And so we're crossing that bridge, I guess. I mean, plenty of devices have as well, but it's not a good bridge to cross, I would say, because you cannot count on these services being around forever. And there are issues sometimes that crop up with this stuff. It's bad for the future of these machines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess at least there is an option to actually have an optical drive on there. But even if we don't like it. But
so there is a point that people always raise, though. But John, PC games are all digital for years, right? And again, the point about PC is that it's an open platform. There are ways around that. A lot of games are all even sold in DRM free, and even if they're not, again, there's ways around it. The PC is that's what the PC is all about. The PC is where digital preservation actually happens. On a closed platform, though, all digital closed platform, you lose all control. You lose control over pricing, the ability to like even resell games if you want. I mean, there's just so many negatives to being purely digital in a closed platform space that it really, really, really is not. I can see why they would want to do it, but it's not where a lot of users of these want to go. I immediately was bombarded with messages from friends and others after this about some of these exact issues. So like people are the hardcore people that are into this stuff that want to collect the games and actually own them. They're not too happy about where we're heading here.
Yeah, it's certainly not great. Alex, anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think John emphasizing the difference in the ecosystem here is important. And I also feel like people use the phrase upsell with a lot of things. But if you're trying to, like, this is already the price. We'll talk about the price in a second, but this is already appealing to a niche audience of people who probably already have a PS5. So they're probably going to want to get the full kit. And I feel like it not including it as a part of the base cost, as well as the kind of like hyper-inflated cost of the disk drive, which is probably many fold the actual cost of the manufacturing the disk drive, whatever. It's mainly like it's kind of gonna make it even more expensive and put the, I think it's just a way of getting more extracted value from the dedicated user in a way that I'm also not very happy about. Obviously, I have my own concerns about digital preservation as well, too. So, but yeah, I think it almost does point out the fact that PS6 might be diskless because this isn't just, flagship model without. It's different.
I think it's problematic when you want your users to come with you from one generation to the next. If you're basically going to stop them being able to access all of the physical discs they've ever bought, going back, at that point, it could be anything like a decade or more.
Right.
I don't think that's
gigantic failure on their
part
to do that.
Microsoft have pointed out, I think Phil Spencer pointed out that they've got problems actually sourcing optical drives these days at a decent price because they're not really made anymore in huge volumes. I don't think it's as much of a problem for Sony because they do actually make them.
Right.
The question is whether they're going to continue to make them.
Maybe they move away from discs entirely. I don't know. I mean, that doesn't solve the backwards compatibility issue, but Nintendo has left discs behind, right? They're very much still chasing physical media. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon for Nintendo.
Okay, let's move on. We've got to talk price. It came up at the end, went down like a cup of cold sick. $700 US, 700 UK pounds, 800 euros, 120,000 yen. Vertical stand sold separately. Don't worry, I'm sorted. Assuming it's the same vertical stand as the one for the Slim, but I suspect it is because ecosystem. Let's take some supporter comments here. Tagon86, why do we see such a large price gap between EU and US this time? It's 799 euros here, which is exactly twice what I paid for my PS4 Pro back in the day. 399 euros. Mackie D says that in brackets, frankly, mental price is obviously the immediate talking point, as that's a whole lot of money for a mid-gen bump. It's for the most enthusiastic of enthusiasts, the wealthy and very few others. But given the lack of price cuts this gen anyway, are we looking at big price hikes for the genuine next generation of consoles? Maybe not 800 quid, but certainly 600 plus seems on the cards. Mr. Birds one of my role
Mr.
models in terms of management style, says. So I guess Sony looked at PlayStation 5 selling for €700 plus for over 2 years on eBay and figured they could make that official. I've been on record for expecting a high price. Mr. Burns has been on the record. But €799 without a disk drive wasn't even on my card. But is that just a market reality? I'm actually inclined to think they will find an audience for it, given the first 2 years of PlayStation 5. I think one of the sort of mitigating factors for that first 2 years is that we were essentially locked up in our own homes and needed things to do and were willing to pay extreme prices to do those things. So I'm not sure we can sort of look at that as a sort of indicator. I do think, however, that consumer electronics are going up in price generally.
They are.
Phones are, flagship phones are $1,000 upwards, typically. They probably will find an audience for this. The question is whether they can actually justify it. What's the difference between a PS5 Pro and a PS5? There's going to be a bit of extra memory in there. I'd assume the cooling has to be better. And the key price is going to the key increase is obviously going to be the size of the chip, but all the evidence is pointing to an existing relatively cheap process node now. So I have to admit I was expecting $599 with a haircut to the price of the base unit. Doesn't look as though that's happening. John, I'm going to go to you first on this one. It's kind of staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, no, we're in a weird age because I think there is this, man, you look at consoles, the history of consoles, and I think people generally expect them to kind of sit within a fairly narrow price window. We actually saw that creep up a bit during the HD era, before that things were typically $300 or less. And then obviously, there was the PS3 situation with $599, but that came down pretty quick.
Wow.
And then we had, right?
I was just thinking, actually, Kaz, here I am, the $599 debacle.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are.
Here we are.
Blew the doors off that. Absolutely. But at the same time, like you said, like electronics in general are like becoming extremely expensive. Like think about when the iPhone was first around and people were balking at the price, but now it's like, oh, you want the Pro model with just like the lower storage, it's like $1,500, right? Flagship phones from other companies, same price range. People upgrade these things every year. GPU prices, look where they're at compared to where they used to be. Like the days of the 1080 are long gone, and even that, that was good enough for the time, but even that felt expensive, you could argue. But now, like GPU prices are like way higher. Like everything is much higher. And based on what Microsoft told us back when we saw the Series X and Series S reveal, it's like just the cost of things at this point. Like it all makes sense why the price is so high. It's just that in this space, it's traditionally stayed within sort of a price ceiling. And every time they've tried to push out of that ceiling, it's been met with negativity, right? It seems more shocking than in other product categories. And I think that's why the sticker shock is there. But I feel like the US price is just like borderline okay somehow. But man, when you look at that Euro price or the Japanese price, it's just like, when it's like, okay, if you want to get a PS5 Pro in Europe with the disc drive, you're looking at like 920 euros. So that's a lot, man. That is a lot. That is a huge jump. This is way, way, way beyond what we've seen in the console space. And I kind of wonder if this is kind of where we're heading in the future. Like, do you foresee $1,000 Xbox, for instance, next gen? Maybe there'll be other options. Maybe this is just where we're landing. And instead of, this is like the opposite of the Series S, Series X, where we now have the base, like sort of a baseline, but then an upper tier. I don't know. I don't know, man. We're just in a weird spot right now with prices.
I was just reading some more supporter questions on the Patreon. Paul Calamata says, I hear all these people out here saying the PS5 Pro is expensive at $700, but Chad Warden wipes his ass with $700. Are all these people broke, or is the PS5 Pro pushing the limits of what's acceptable for console pricing?
Well,
It's pushing the limits for sure, and I'm going to be really interested to see. I mean, every time somebody predicts doom for a new piece of consumer electronics, they kind of forget that they're initially available in limited quantities and always sell out. So I'm fully aware at this point that I think that the PS5 Pro is going to sell out simply, because there'll be
by
limited
virtue,
numbers at launch.
yeah.
But it's certainly going to be a test, I think. And that's fascinating. It's not great though. I think that $600 would have been a lot more palatable. I think for $700, I'm disappointed at the quality of the presentation. I think they could have done a whole lot more with that. Man, that's kind of crazy. But we are seeing things like more expensive GPUs. I guess my question is, this kind of pricing, if it does move on to like PS6, it's surely not. But because the whole point of a console is a cheap, subsidized mainstream box. I don't think there's any level of subsidy going into the PS5 Pro at this price point.
No.
If they're breaking even with a 5 at $500, I don't see $200 of additional costs in the Pro. I think there's probably making some money on that even. At the same time, we have seen that as we just pointed out, GPU prices have gone up. I just wonder at this point whether it's just going to push more people towards the PC, simply because, you aren't paying the monthly subscription fee. You don't need to pay that at all. If you want free games, you get them from Epic. Cloud saves, everything is there on Steam and actually produced in a better form than I'd say any of the consoles. So right. I am concerned that this is actually going to push people towards towards PCs
or towards just the regular PS5. Or they'll wait for the Switch 2.
Well, there's a lot of people suggesting that the Switch 2 is going to be like $500, which would be
but I mean, getting a decent gaming PC ain't cheap either, right? So,
well, I mean, I have seen some bargain forums with pre-built systems with an i5 and a 4060 for like £500, which I'd say that's actually really, really good value.
It is, but you know the kind of extra work it takes to get great performance out of that kind of machine, right?
Yeah.
For the 4060, yeah. But
the 4060?
I just feel like coming to that value proposition thing, I think this is just kind of like the second level MacBook. This is like when they give you this choice, and the people who really love PlayStation are going to buy this. That's why Rich is saying it's going to sell out. It will. Like, the people who love PlayStation really, I think they're just going to buy it. But like when you think about like that utility of price, I do think it is entering a different category of consumer electronic at that price level, especially with the EU price level. Yes, you will probably never beat a console currently with the manufacturing stuff going on at its price point for raw performance in a game. But then when you enter this price class category, then you think, well, what if I instead invest the price I would have put into the disk drive into a PC, and then you start getting into a different, €1,000 PC is actually pretty awesome.
No, I agree.
It's what I mean? So
PC is still a different thing in terms of like, it still sucks in the living room. It is usable, but it's not great in the living room.
That's going to get addressed, isn't it? Sooner
that's what we've been talking about, right? And hopefully that is exactly what happens.
I mean, if Microsoft doesn't do it, Valve are going to do it. I mean, the work's essentially done, really. The Steam Deck OS would translate perfectly to a desktop machine.
Mostly,
yeah. But I don't think anybody really wants to create that desktop machine. They just want to make PCs work, and you just roll your own, or let ASUS or your friendly neighborhood PC builder make one instead. I think that's probably the way forward in that regard. It's going to require a lot of work from PlayStation to keep that audience if the price is just going to continually go up. I mean, I suspect that 10th gen consoles are no problem at all. They'll make it happen. But 11th gen and beyond, I'm really interested to see how they're going to be able to pull that off.
Right.
Yeah, crazy stuff. next topic before we move on to supporter questions. What do we want to do with this machine? We now know what it does in broad strokes. I'll tell you what I'd like to see. I want to test that Ultra Boost mode to see what it does for PS4 and PS5 titles. I want to see Alex doing a deep dive into PSSR. I mean, you've got games, presumably all of the Sony first-party games like Horizon, Forbidden West, etc. The content should be comparable with the PC versions. Particularly when it comes to the specific tests that you specialize in, Alex.
I especially think since the Last of Us Part 2 is going to launch, and knowing Naughty Dog, they won't use dynamic res. So I'll try and avoid titles that use dynamic res because that'll lead to uneven playing fields and makes it just complex. But I think those Naughty Dog titles, if they add it to T-Loop Part 1 as well too, that could be another great comparison point to a certain degree. So, there's a lot to be said there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ray tracing, I don't know what we can do on that except to essentially chart what they're actually using the features for. Really interested to see what those features are going to be. In the Sony documentation, they were basically saying, for example, if a game has RT reflections, you can add RT shadows. If a game doesn't have ray tracing at all, you could add ray tracing.
Which is, once again, I mean, yes, but the lack of a CPU upgrade here is the one thing where I'm like, we know it's super expensive on a CPU to do this ray tracing.
Exactly what I was thinking. But then again, Alex, I feel like if you've already incurred that CPU cost and you're doing other ray tracing effects, adding another ray tracing effect is quite feasible. It's more like it's for the games that don't have ray tracing, we're implementing it. Then there's that huge CPU cost that wasn't factored in, and then there's a problem, right?
Right.
Any particular lines of inquiry you'd like to look into, John, when we get hands-on with this hardware?
I mean, obviously, Pisser. That is the big one for me. I'm very, very interested to see what PSSR does for image quality. I do think that actually might be the biggest game changer here. If it's like even close to something like XESS or especially DLSS, then it's going to be big. I think especially on a TV, because the thing about DLSS is it's so good that it holds up even on a large screen at a desk with your face close to the screen, playing PC games. It holds up really well. On a TV, it's going to solve the image quality problem. Is how I'm hoping it will be. Although one of the things I'm curious about is, so two things I want to know. First of all, will there be a boost mode like PS4 Pro? I'm going to say yes, probably based on
they've said there's going to be a boost mode that will improve.
Good.
There's also some bizarre talk of image quality improvements for PlayStation 4 games, which it's actually given block capitals PlayStation image enhancement, I believe it is, or something quite like it. So which kind of sounds
SR1,
like
baby.
Which kind of sounds like dare I say it, bespoke technology. So I'm going to be interested.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, enhanced image quality.
Okay. I want to see what that means.
Just the actual full quote there. Other enhancements include PS5 Pro Game Boost, which can apply to more than 8,500 backwards compatible PS4 games playable on PS5 Pro. This feature may stabilize or improve the performance of supported PS4 and PS5 games. Enhanced image quality for PS4 games is also available to improve the resolution on select PS4 games.
Select is weird, though.
What the heck does this mean?
It kind of suggests that maybe enhanced resolutions or even PSSR may be injected into PS4 titles, but it sounds as though it's going to be a developer feature. The developer would need to do it.
Word. Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
First thing I want to test is Elden Ring. Is it gonna fix it? Like finally, will you actually be able to play this at 60 FPS, maybe even with the ray tracing turned on?
I would be surprised about the ray tracing, but I think the performance mode should be doable.
One would hope. We'll see. The other thing I'm curious about, and I feel like I already know the answer, but will they improve the VRR support? I feel like no. But gosh darn it, if you're listening,
could do that
if you're watching this, anyone from PlayStation, guys, like there are ways to improve this. The VRR support needs work. It needs to have low frame rate compensation.
Right.
Come on now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Supporter questions. We've got a bunch of them. And I'm going to start off, if I can bring the sheet up. We've actually a couple of points and questions from SJ33 in brackets, Jake. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
And T-Money58, basically saying the same point. Hi, all, says Jake. Xbox don't make many correct decisions, but can we agree they were correct to not make their own Pro console? And T-Money58 says, I feel like Phil is quite pleased with himself with not pursuing an Xbox rival to PS5 Pro. Based on that showing, am I wrong? This all kind of comes back to the concept of value for the extra money that you're going to get and whether it's worthwhile or not. Phil obviously made the determination that it's not. Sony made the determination that it was. Where do you stand on it, John?
Oh my gosh.
We have to see the games, really, don't we?
We got to see the games to see if this is even worth it at all. And so obviously in terms of sold consoles between the two, the PlayStation 5 is leading the Xbox by a very large margin right now. And even then we're still debating whether this is worthwhile, right? I think with the Xbox space, when you look at what the sales have been like for the console lately, they're not really moving many units anymore. Like the subsidized console models is clearly not working very well for them at this point, which is why we've been talking about them shifting gears potentially for next generation in the first place. So given what they might be doing, it absolutely makes zero sense for them to launch another enhanced subsidized Xbox, right?
Yeah.
Like I just, it doesn't logically make sense, especially if they're planning to shift their strategy so dramatically next gen. Like this, it just doesn't actually fit into it at all. And so I think they absolutely made the right decision. I think they're riding this out for now, and they're just going to keep releasing games on Xbox Series consoles. You're still going to get Xbox games. They're coming along smooth. Game Pass is still going. And then they have big plans for next time. And there's just no way that an Xbox Series, I don't even know what you call it,
Triple X,
the Triple X would make any sense this time, because with Xbox One X, it actually did make a lot of sense, given that Xbox One was the first console Xbox release that was basically inferior technically to the competition. Like Xbox and Xbox 360 were built on the fact that they were the better box. PS3 tried to claim it was, but it really wasn't. Let's be honest. The 360 was a better piece of kit overall. Xbox One was a gigantic step down, and Xbox One X basically caught up and surpassed the best of that gen. It didn't necessarily win them the generation, but it definitely did something for hearts and minds, and it was a beautifully designed console that sort of made up for the deficiencies of that original Xbox One, both in terms of power and just physical design. I would also say, like, it was just a really nice box. But yeah, this sort of thing doesn't need to happen right now. And Xbox Series X is still, it's everything it needs to be right now still.
Yeah, I'd also argue that, with all of the Microsoft games coming out on PC,
exactly.
I don't think this is a hardware problem. It's a software problem. They need to make their PC versions of their games actually tap into all of the high-end features that PC has to offer. And there's been progress there, but it's been slow.
It is slow.
I mean, there's no reason why Forza Motorsport shouldn't have shipped with the RTGI that was mooted, right, for example. I mean, high-end PCs, I mean, Alex has demonstrably proven that it actually works and works in a playable sense. So, that's kind of where I think Microsoft should be putting their emphasis for now, at least on the software side and on PC. And then, there's a multitude of hardware out there that can use those features. So I don't think Phil is rowing the day, so to speak, with the arrival of PS5 Pro. It's just not really on their radar at the moment. Should we move on? This question from Richardion Graphicus, Emperor of the Republic of Gamers.
Dude, these names get better and better every day.
Gran Turismo 7 will get an 8K mode according to a CNET PS5 Pro hands-on interview. Is that as stupid as it sounds? We kind of talked about that a bit earlier, right, John? It's on the face of it, it probably is a bit stupid in terms of overall
Daft
application. Daft. Yeah, I think that's probably frivolous, shall we say.
Exactly.
Because we live in a world where 8K, screens came out, good 4 years ago, and nobody was interested. I owned one for 4 years, and I got no particular needs to have an 8K screen. I've moved back to a 4K with OLED. So it's not stupid, is it? It's just the fact that Polyphony Digital like doing this kind of stuff.
I think that's literally all it is. This is what Polyphony Digital likes to do. They love to push the envelope on weird random tech things, and they have a rich tradition of doing exactly that. Earlier I mentioned the other things, but they even had that 60 FPS mode in Gran Turismo on PS1, right?
Yeah.
So like they love to fiddle with sort of pushing the boundaries of things. I'll be curious to see what the 8K mode actually entails, if it's the full game, what the frame rate's like what is it? It could be like it might limit it to certain types of races possibly, but then again they're already pushing the VR stuff, and they have 120 FPS mode on the regular PS5. Like clearly there's enough room where if they're able to do like 4K 60 with ray tracing in game now on the Pro, then it makes sense that they would be able to do 8K 60 without ray tracing, I would say.
Right.
Oh yeah. I think, well, I don't think 8K with like native, but I think
maybe not. No,
PSSR
with
like with 4K internal, like trying to even conceptualize the cost of real 8K is just.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Oh yeah, but I would imagine it's something like that. That would be interesting to see still.
So the question I have though is if they actually unlock a proper 8K output for the console side, which was missing from both machines. If they do that, are we going to get the Tourist just automatically working? The developers suggested we probably would, but maybe, I don't know, that it could potentially work. So that was their theory, but they obviously couldn't test it yet.
Okay,
but
that's interesting.
I wouldn't be surprised. Knowing Shinin, though, they would probably go back and update it
if it didn't work. Yeah, you're quite
exactly.
Right. Yeah. Going back to this GT7 thing, I reckon it's going to be it's going to be using PSSR. Pretty sure, right? So it's going to be an interesting exercise just to get the captures and to see how good PSSR works upscaling to 8K. I can't imagine they're going to be doing native resolution 8K rendering.
No.
So it's an interesting bullet point for us to test, I think. And we are here. We have the technology. We did 8K capture from RTX 4090 a while back. So, we're good to go there. As stupid as it sounds, we're going to be doing it. Let's move on to this question. We've got a couple actually from the same guy, but we'll all go. Who knows? This one's from Cookie Butter, actually, not Cookie Cutter. Sony claim a 45% increase in graphical power compared to PS5, with a major improvement of ray tracing and upscaling too. Which PC GPU do you believe will most closely match the new PS5 Pro GPU? Now, this is really tricky, right? Because obviously there was a great deal of commonality between the PlayStation 5 GPU and the RX 6700 10 gig. Same level of compute units, broadly similar processing power, different memory bandwidth. But when we tested it in like-for-like scenarios, very, very close. There are two AMD GPUs that we've kind of had in mind for this, and they would be the AMD RX Radeon 6800, not the 6800 XT. That should deliver your 45% GPU improvement over base PS5, and it also has 60 compute units, I believe. And the alternative to that from the RDNA 3 lineup would be the RX 7800 XT, but you would need to downclock that significantly to about like 2.15 gigahertz, I think, to get a similar level of compute. The problem with talking about all of this is that neither of those GPUs will presumably have the RDNA 4 based RT features that we think are in the PlayStation 5 Pro. So that probably wouldn't be a good match. Similarly, there's not going to be any machine learning silicon in there. It's just extensions. It's just running ML extensions on the CUs, right? On RDNA 3. Is that correct, Alex? I think that's the case.
Yeah, that's it. That's at least for the consumer product. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, there's nothing to run Pisser on, or even an equivalent. I am intrigued as to what the footprint of XeSS DP4A is, but it's not the same thing. So yeah.
Mm,
Mm. Um, we were thinking about the RTX 3070 Ti, I think, Alex.
yeah.
Broadly
But
equivalent compute, does have DLSS, does have better ray tracing, but even then it's mostly guesswork on
yeah,
those features.
it's like, yeah, that's guesswork. And also, if we're doing comparisons and trying to get that to get proper on PC, the PS5 Pro is going to have more available graphics memory, which is going to, like, there's no great analog at the moment until maybe RDNA 4 comes out. And then we'll start seeing more analogs, I think. I mean, the CU will be different in RDNA 4, but we'll at least have something hopefully more similar. And hopefully by RDNA 4, we're going to be start seeing machine learning acceleration in desktop GPUs from AMD.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on to the next question. It is another one from Cookie Butter. The announcement had a focus on not choosing between performance or fidelity modes. Do you think Sony will encourage developers to have a single PS5 Pro mode to fulfill this vision, or are we destined to see even prettier 30 FPS games? John?
If you build it, there will be 30 FPS.
Mm-hmm.
It always happens. It is
Already saw
inevitable.
it.
It is inevitable. It is inevitable. And we saw it in this presentation too.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like they are potentially encouraging developers to dial this back by specifically saying that you won't have to choose. That seems to be a marketing push for them, which leads me to believe that Sony titles might go that direction. Not all of them. GT7 clearly is not going to go in that direction. Others might. But I feel like on the third party side, I don't, it's hard to say. Like, it feels like there is still room for there to be a choice, perhaps. Although with the CPU being what it is, everything starts to become more CPU bottlenecked, right?
Yeah.
More than GPU bottlenecked. So I'd imagine they just push up GPU features up to a certain point, and then if your CPU bottlenecked, that kind of puts a hard cap on how high your frame rate can go, right?
Yeah.
Versus the regular machine. So maybe
they're more likely to load up on, stuff like, enhanced draw distances, higher resolution.
Exactly. So I think we're going to see probably frame rates similar to performance modes on base PS5, but just with much better image quality.
Okay.
Right.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, John actually said everything I probably would have said.
I think something we said earlier that, Mark Cerny was talking about, developers getting to grips with the hardware and then, rolling their own solutions. And I dare say we'll see various modes depending on what they come up with.
Yeah.
I think mode selection seems to have become a thing. And I think that, with the inherent nature of the scalability of a lot of games these days, when they're producing their PC versions, there are going to be opportunities to bring some of those features, those more GPU heavy features, over to PlayStation 5 Pro. And we'll still probably have fidelity and performance modes. Okay, let's move on to the final question. This one from Three Fingers. So if it's an AMD APU, how can they increase the GPU size by 67% but no CPU change? Is this a totally custom chip for PS5 Pro? Doesn't strike me as a new AMD product, or Xbox would have had the exact same upgrade. Alex, it's not the same. It is a custom chip. I think we're pretty clear on that because, we've got custom machine learning in there. And, I think there's going to be a Strix Halo based APU from AMD, but the GPU is nowhere near as this size. It's more PS5.
Yeah.
What do you think of this question?
I
guess the question is really, why no CPU change?
I mean, why I think is price and compatibility and size there. Some of the larger things that changed in Zen over time were cache sizes. If you go between Zen 1 and Zen 3, beefing up all the things that have made Zen better over time are going to be increasing die space. Sony cut off parts of the FPU in the PS5 to save on die space and things like that. So in manufacturing costs as a result. So I think it's mainly just they want to push that, and they realize that people, I think, like they realized it with the PS4 Pro. Like, yeah, that had a arguably larger, sizable CPU upgrade than this does. But I think they realized like people were just really loved those 4K checkerboard modes. They flaunted them on Twitter, etc. They were really happy with them. Did they? I don't know. Either way, it was a talking point. Like
it
this
was,
looks.
yeah,
It's
that,
4K.
I think that was the key point. Yes, you're right. There was a display imperative to produce a better PlayStation. And the imperative this time around is basically Mark Cerny saying 75% of people play in performance mode. The performance modes don't look as good as they could. Here's the PlayStation 5 Pro to solve that problem.
Yeah.
It
would have otherwise been much more transformative and a much larger gap towards a much closer step towards next gen if they changed it to a later Zen version. It would also been more expensive than it already is right now. I think it's calculated very, very well.
Right.
I don't think it's necessarily the best thing ever. I've said it tons of times before on the channel. If someone had a Ryzen 5 3600 and they're upgrading their GPU, I would say, don't do that. Get a different system. So it's very different than what I would do, but that doesn't mean the audience isn't fine with it. Right?
I think there's a thing here, which is that this isn't going to be addressing people who want a high-end PC because, the whole PC ecosystem now it's kind of moved on from 60 frames per second. It's like 144 upwards with VRR. And, for that, you're going to need a more modern CPU architecture. You're going to need like Ryzen 5000 X3D, Ryzen 7000, latest Intel Core. So that's kind of the way that is happening in the PC space, and that's not something that's being addressed by the PS5 Pro. It is literally, a better looking PS5 experience. It's not high end PC. It's not really troubling it in that regard. Right. John, any thoughts on this?
Not especially. I think you guys have covered this pretty thoroughly.
I think the cost issue is probably quite a big thing because, the chip is going to be pretty large as it is. And die space area on that die matters a lot. And the later Zens do occupy significantly more die area. And they're probably not getting proportionately the same boost in performance as you would from, adding a GPU that's much larger along with machine learning based upscaling. So I think that's just, the way it is, unfortunately. Next gen, though, who knows? Mm-hmm. That is the final question, therefore, the end of this particular DF Direct special. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, share on the off chance that you did. Yes.
There is some. I found that right now on eBay, you can get a copy of Kuon for Sony PlayStation 2 with water damage for just $749.
Really?
Making that, it's only a little bit more than the PS5 Pro in North America. So if you can spare that extra $50, you too can own a water damaged copy of Kuon.
Okay, that's essential information.
Just letting you know, it's out there.
As I said, like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed the content. Ring the bell for messages that may or may not appear when new DF content, quote-unquote, drops. Store.digitalfoundry.net for access to our merchandising wares. And, of course, please do consider joining our Patreon. But that's all from us on this one. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.